So this last month has been really exciting for the PC master race because we started off with NVIDIA announcing the RTX 3000 series GPUs, and then today we have AMD coming out with some Zen 3 announcements. Now, this isn't necessarily a review date per se, it's just more of an exclusive look or a peek at the new 5000 series processors. So basically, I'm going to be talking about a bunch of new things about Zen 3 and the Ryzen 5000 series, like the specs of the new processors, their prices, release dates, a few new details about the architecture, some performance results, and motherboard compatibility. So let's start things off with where AMD finds themselves right now, and that's leading in pretty much every category. While Zen was a great step forward, and Zen Plus even more so, Zen 2 meanwhile really kicked things up a notch, and now we're with Zen 3. And it looks really promising. It hasn't been all that long ago since the last Ryzen CPU release, which was done back in July with the XT series, and those CPUs didn't really bring a lot to the table, but it sort of set the groundwork for this launch. Every new generation of Ryzen CPUs has been a constant evolution that addressed weaknesses of previous generation, and that's exactly what Zen 3 is too. Basically, AMD saw what needed to be improved, like gaming performance, single thread performance, and some other key areas, and they attacked those head on. But they also didn't want to complicate their lives by completely shifting the Zen architecture to a brand new layout and manufacturing process. So Zen 3 stays on an updated 7nm node, but the underlying design got a pretty big facelift. A cornerstone of this new design is a revised layout that clusters 8 cores in a single CCX module, which has direct access to 32 MB of L3 cache. Supposedly, that gives huge benefits in gaming, single-core workloads, and less memory latency. There's also a bunch of other updates to the overall architecture, like better load store performance, enhanced floating point and integer engines, and more. We'll cover all of those in the review, but it's all supposed to result in an instructions per clock increase of about 19% over the Ryzen 3000 series. That is just super impressive for a single generation. Back in the XT series video, I mentioned that this launch might actually be a part of a much larger plan, even though their real-world performance benefits were pretty limited. Well, those CPUs allowed AMD to test the 7nm manufacturing process's ability to run at higher frequencies. We're seeing the results right now with Zen 3. One of the biggest moves for this generation is AMD finally consolidating all of their Zen 3 CPUs under the same 5000 series name. That's good news, since things were starting to get confusing with Zen 2 based CPUs using the 4000H and U series for mobile, 3000 series for desktop, and also 4000G name for OEM desktop APUs. Let's just hope they stick to that and finally teach Intel how to name products. Another thing I want to mention before I get into specs is the release date for the 5000 series CPUs. Right now, AMD is set to have them launch with them available on November the 5th. And from what we've been hearing, they've already started production, so I hope the stock situation is going to be okay. But then again, this is 2020, so anything could happen. Now, the result of Zen 3 is a lineup of new CPUs that look a lot like the current Ryzen 3000 series when it comes to core counts, clock speeds, and TDPs. But those changes to the underlying architecture make those similarities pointless as a comparison. At the very top is the 16-core, 32-thread Ryzen 9 5950X, which has a 200 MHz higher boost clock than the 3950X, a price of $800 US, which is $50 more expensive and sticks to 105 watts. That's followed by the 12-core, 24-thread 5900X, and this is where things get really interesting on some fronts. While its boost clock is 100 MHz higher than the 3900 XT, the base frequency gets a 100 MHz cut. That 100 MHz reduction versus the 3000 XT series is something you'll see with every 5000 series CPUs, and it was likely done to keep TDPs as low as possible. Oh, and the price goes up by a cool $50 here as well. Basically, this is something you'll see with other CPUs here too. They cost more than the 3000 series launched at, and that's understandable provided there's an equal amount of performance uplifts. Also remember, the maximum single core boost speeds you're seeing for these CPUs are based on absolutely perfect conditions. The chances you'll see them on a regular basis is slim, but they still represent a pretty significant improvement versus the previous gen. Moving down, and the Ryzen 7 5800X is being launched to replace the 3800 XT with exactly the same boost frequency, lower base speeds, and a price bump of $50. What we don't see yet is a clear 3700X replacement, but I'm pretty sure AMD has a few more CPUs they'll roll out soon after launch, so that might be one of them. The Ryzen 5 5600X meanwhile seems like it'll be a great bang for the buck gaming CPU. Not only that, but its TDP is now down to 65 watts, which makes it a really interesting choice for ultra small form factor builds, especially with all those juicy architectural improvements AMD's talking about. I should also mention the 5600X is the only CPU in this new lineup that'll get an included heatsink. According to AMD, it'll ship with a Wraith Stealth cooler. The only catch here is the price, which also gets a $50 increase versus the 3600 XT. On higher-end processors, that didn't really hurt too badly, but this is a 20% premium for a product that was super affordable beforehand. It also increases the cost of entry into the 5000 series because what you don't see right now are direct replacements for the non-X series and Ryzen 3. AMD could be waiting for a later date to launch those, but they could be satisfied with what they have right now. But the real news here is actually the performance, because AMD's claims are pretty earth-shattering, or should I call it Intel shattering. With their focus on IPC and quicker access to onboard memory resources, they made claims that the 5900X can beat the 3900X by an average of 26% in games. Now look, that's at 1080p, and we've already seen with our RTX 3080 Ryzen scaling video that at 1440p the differences between CPUs become close to zero. Even the 5950X can pretty much dominate its predecessor in gaming. Single-thread performance was always an area where AMD was a bit lacking, but that's been demolished with Zen 3 too, and it accounts for a lot of the reason why we're seeing such good gaming performance. This all basically brings them even with or even beating Intel's 10900K in games, and since that was the best gaming CPU around, well, that's a pretty big deal for AMD. They now have core counts and gaming on their side. There wasn't really much shown about performance in other applications since gaming seems to be what AMD wanted to focus on. But they did show this for the 5950X, and it does look like all of those architectural improvements also make a positive impact on multi-core heavy workloads. Now, usually we see new CPU architectures released hand in hand with brand new motherboards, but that isn't going to happen this time. Both X570 and B550 will be sticking around and will have full support for Zen 3 via a microcode update. As a matter of fact, some have already added a beta version of the BIOSes on their product pages, with a plan to have full mass production support in time for launch. As usual, motherboard manufacturers will start offering some refresh boards with minor changes just to take advantage of the Zen 3 interest. Now, you might remember this chart too, since it showed X470 and B450 boards don't support Zen 3. But AMD quickly backpedaled on that. Now they're going to have unofficial support via beta BIOSes, so you'll just need to update your BIOS before switching out CPUs. I also want to mention that we did talk to a few motherboard companies, and they've been telling us that there's no official support for Zen 3 on their existing B450 and X470 boards. There are going to be a few select boards that will get an update from now until the end of December, but you just have to pay close attention to the CPU support page before assuming that your old system will have support for Zen 3. Also remember that according to AMD, this is the last CPU on the AM4 socket. In the past, Ryzen buyers could be confident that their motherboards would be compatible with upcoming processors. But this one is sort of a dead end since Zen 4 will be brand new from the ground up. That's probably why there aren't any new chipsets launching, and it's a good decision, especially since B550 and X570 are already more feature-packed than anything Intel has right now. So I guess that pretty much covers everything for now, and I have to admit, AMD's progress looks super impressive. They've been able to deliver 3 Zen architectures in 3 years and have managed to beat Intel in almost everything. Zen 3 is marching onwards while the Core series is still left spinning on its wheels. Basically, AMD could now have big wins in IPC, efficiency, thread counts, and gaming, and that's a very big problem for Intel, especially since Rocket Lake S is only due for launch next year sometime in late Q1. It also looks like they're confident enough to charge a bit more for their CPUs as well. That's good from a business perspective, but only good for buyers if the price increases align with performance boosts. But one thing's for sure, it'll be really interesting to test these new CPUs in real-world use case scenarios and test AMD's claims. I guess we'll just have to wait until the actual review date, so definitely stay tuned for our coverage and let us know what you guys think about AMD's new Zen 3 announcements, specifically with the 5000 series CPUs. Are you guys excited? I'm curious to know. I'm Ibra with Hardware Canucks. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.